The Ashford mansion stood against the November twilight like a monument to old money and older secrets, its stone facade catching the dying light in shades of amber and blood. Evangeline Marlowe had been here 17 times over 18 months, always as Kian's girlfriend, always feeling slightly out of place among the marble columns and Renaissance paintings that probably cost more than her student loans. Tonight felt different. Tonight the house seemed to loom over her with something close to malice. She clutched her phone tighter as she approached the heavy oak doors, Kian's silence echoing louder than any argument they'd ever had. 3 days without a returned call. 3 days of messages left unread, of excuses from his assistant, of that crawling sensation that something fundamental had shifted while she wasn't looking. The November air bit through her coat, or maybe that was just the dread settling into her bones like frost. The door stood unlocked. That should have been her first warning, but Eva's mind was cataloging other details. The empty foyer stretching in cathedral-like grandeur, Italian tile that echoed her footsteps like accusations, the conspicuous absence of staff who usually moved through these halls like ghosts, keeping secrets better than priests. She'd been raised to believe that love meant fighting for what mattered, that relationships required courage and confrontation. Her mother, a nurse who'd worked double shifts to keep their family afloat, had taught her that giving up was never an option. Her father, a teacher who'd believed education could fix broken systems, had shown her that some problems demanded you walk straight into the fire. So Eva climbed the grand staircase, her hands sliding along mahogany, polished to mirror shine, each step taking her closer to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions, doors closed like sealed tombs. She knew which one was Kian's private suite. She'd been there before, though, never without invitation, never without him greeting her with that boyish smile that made her forget why the Ashford name made hardened men cross the street. The door stood slightly ajar. Later, Eva would remember this moment with crystalline clarity, the way the hallway seemed to narrow, the way her heartbeat suddenly filled her ears like thunder, the way some primal part of her brain screamed to turn around and leave. But she was 26 years old and had spent 4 years working with trafficking survivors at Hope Harbor, women who'd endured horrors that made relationship problems seem trivial. She'd learned to walk into difficult rooms, to face ugly truths, to survive what needed surviving. She pushed the door open. The room smelled like expensive cologne and betrayal. Late afternoon light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the scene with brutal clarity. The massive bed, with silk sheets the color of champagne, scattered clothes forming a trail from door to mattress, and tangled together in post-coital abandon, Kian Ashford and Celeste Vaughn. Her boyfriend. Her best friend since junior year of college. The sound that came from Eva's throat was smaller than a scream, more animal. A wounded noise she'd never heard herself make before the crack of ice, before it gives way beneath your feet. Kian's head snapped up first. Dark hair, disheveled face flushed, and for one perfect second, he looked like exactly what he was. A spoiled 28-year-old caught doing something he knew would destroy someone he claimed to love. Evie! Celeste sat up slower, deliberate, her expression morphing from shock to something harder, something that looked almost like satisfaction. The sheet fell away, revealing skin Eva had seen 1,000 times in gym locker rooms, at beaches during girls' weekends, that now felt like elaborate lies. This isn't what it looks like. The sheer audacity of the cliché almost made Eva laugh. Her hands had gone numb, her vision tunneling to just their faces, her brain struggling to process betrayal, squared lover and confidant, both naked, both looking at her like she was the intrusion in a scene they'd choreographed without her knowledge. How long, Eva heard herself ask the question, feeling important somehow, though she wasn't sure why duration mattered. Betrayal was betrayal, whether it lasted a week or a year. The damage was already done, carved into her chest like initials in old wood. Celeste spoke before Kian could form words, her voice carrying that particular cruelty that comes from knowing exactly where to strike. Does it matter? You were never right for him, Evangeline. Too ordinary. Too safe. She said safe like it was an insult, a curse word. Her eyes held no apology, No shame, just calculation that made Eva realize this moment had been building for longer than she'd understood. Kian needs someone who understands his world, someone who can navigate the complexity of what his family is, what he's expected to become. The words landed like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision because somewhere deep down, Eva had always suspected this truth, that she was too ordinary for Kian Ashford, that their relationship had an expiration date written in invisible ink, that men who wore $10,000 watches and drove cars that cost more than houses didn't end up with social workers who bought their clothes at outlet malls and counted pennies at the grocery store. Kian was on his feet now, wrapping the sheet around his waist like it could somehow preserve dignity that was already shattered beyond repair. "Let me explain, and you understand it." Eva turned to Celeste, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Always ambitious, always angling for the next party, the next connection, the next opportunity to climb social ladders Eva hadn't even known existed. 4 years of friendship replaying in her mind like a film reel, every coffee date and late-night conversation now suspect, contaminated by the knowledge that Celeste had been planning this, positioning herself using Eva as cover to get close to something she wanted more. "You understand the violence, the blood money, the fact that his family careful." Kian's voice hardened in a way Eva had never heard before, something dangerous surfacing beneath the charm, like sharks circling in shallow water. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Eva took a step backward, suddenly aware that she was alone in a mansion belonging to people who made their enemies disappear, that she'd been swimming in waters far deeper than she'd understood, that the man she'd loved for 18 months had been hiding things that went beyond simple infidelity. "I know enough. I know that your father runs half the organized crime in Chicago. I know that your business associates are the kind of men who solve problems with violence and call it strategy. I know that you've been lying to me about who you really are since the day we met at that charity gala, when you pretended to care about helping trafficking victims while your family probably profits from the systems that create them." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Kian's face drained of color, then flushed with something between shame and rage. "Then why are you here?" His question cut deeper than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as deep as he meant it to. The challenge in his voice, the flash of something cruel beneath the boyish exterior, this was the real Kian Ashford, the one she'd never been allowed to see clearly. "If I'm so terrible, if my family disgusts you, why did you come? Why stay with me for 18 months if you thought I was a criminal?" Celeste laughed, actually laughed, the sound like glass breaking in the silence. "She stayed because she thought she could save you, Kian. The good girl from the good family doing good nonprofit work, convinced she could reform the bad boy with her pure love and moral compass. You were her project, her chance to feel noble while dating someone dangerous enough to be interesting, but clean enough to take home to her dead parents' memory." The cruelty of it took Eva's breath away, not just the words but the accuracy underneath them. She had thought she could be different for Kian, that their relationship was building something real, that maybe he was trying to get away from the darkness of the Ashford empire and she was his way out. The delusion felt pathetic now, exposed under fluorescent truth. "I'm done." Eva's voice came out quieter than she intended, but steady. She turned toward this door, needing to leave before the tears could come, before her composure could crack completely and give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "We're done. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't send your people to check on me. Whatever this was, it's over." The hallway stretched longer now, stretching like something from a nightmare. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on maintaining the dignity she had left, on not running, even though every instinct screamed to flee. She was halfway down the grand staircase when the sensation hit her, that crawling awareness of being watched, of eyes tracking her movement like a predator, calculating trajectory. Her hand tightened on the banister as she scanned the foyer below. Empty. Silent. But the feeling persisted, raising goosebumps along her arms beneath her coat sleeves. "You walk away from betrayal better than most men I've known." The voice came from her left. Eva's head snapped toward it, finding a man she'd only glimpsed in passing, only seen at family gatherings, where she'd felt perpetually out of place, like an imposter at a masked ball. Dominic Ashford stood in the library doorway, backlit by the warm glow of lamps illuminating walls of leather-bound books that were probably first editions worth more than her annual salary. He was taller than she'd realized, or maybe he just filled space differently than other people. Late 40s with silver threading through dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from marble, all hard angles and sharp edges softened only slightly by what might have been cruel beauty in his youth. He wore a three-piece suit like armor, perfectly tailored, perfectly pressed, the kind of expensive that whispered rather than shouted wealth. But it was his eyes that held her frozen on the stairs. Dark eyes that had seen too much, done too much, eyes that belonged to a man who made life and death decisions before breakfast and slept soundly afterward. The weight of his attention felt like standing under a spotlight, like being assessed by something ancient and dangerous, wearing human skin as camouflage. Mr. Ashford. Dominic. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, unhurried but purposeful, each step measured and deliberate. Mr. Ashford was my father, and he's been dead for 23 years, though I suspect he'd have appreciated your composure just now. He always said the best steel is forged in the hottest fires. Eva descended the last few steps, instinct telling her that staying above him would be seen as either defiant or foolish, neither of which felt safe in this moment. Up close, she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably had a name in a language she didn't speak, something that reminded her of leather and smoke and power that didn't need to announce itself. I didn't know anyone was here. This is my home. I'm always here in one way or another. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the exact moment something shifted in his expression, calculation giving way to something that might have been respect or curiosity or hunger disguised as casual interest. I heard raised voices. I came to investigate, found quite the illuminating scene playing out on my security monitors. Heat flooded Eva's cheeks. The humiliation of being watched during her worst moment, adding insult to the injury already bleeding through her chest. How long were you watching? Long enough to see you demonstrate more backbone than my son has shown his entire life. Dominic tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't, some stubborn part of her refusing to give him that satisfaction. Long enough to see that he's an even bigger fool than I thought, and I've thought him a fool for quite some time now. I should go. Eva moved to step around him, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but under this man's scrutiny, while her world was still spinning from Betrayal's impact. His hand caught her wrist, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her forward momentum. The touch of skin on skin sent electricity up her arm, his palm warm, his grip precise, the touch of a man who knew exactly how much pressure to apply to command attention without causing pain. I have a proposition for you. Every alarm bell in Eva's head started ringing, every instinct honed from 4 years of working with vulnerable women, every warning her mother had given her about men who offered help when you were at your lowest. I'm not interested in whatever revenge. Dominic's interruption was simple, direct, the word falling between them like a stone dropped in still water. Real revenge, not gossip or social media posts or slashed tires. I'm talking about the kind of vengeance that will hollow out my son from the inside, the kind he'll feel every single day for the rest of his life. Eva's breath caught, despite herself. Despite knowing this was dangerous territory, despite the voice in her head screaming that Dominic Ashford was more lethal than Kian could ever be. Why would you want to hurt your own son? Because he needs to learn that actions have consequences. Something flickered behind Dominic's eyes. Disappointment, anger, some complex cocktail of paternal feeling that didn't quite translate to normal family dynamics. Because he's been coddled and protected his entire life, and it's made him weak, reckless, stupid. And because what he did to you shows a fundamental lack of respect that I find intolerable in anyone, but especially in someone who shares my blood. You don't even know me. I know enough. Dominic released her wrist but didn't step back, maintaining the proximity that felt both threatening and strangely intimate. I know you work for Hope Harbor, the nonprofit that helps trafficking victims. I know you grew up in Portland, that your father was a teacher and your mother was a nurse, both deceased in a car accident 7 years ago. I know you have a master's degree in social work from Columbia, and $73,000 in student loan debt. I know you drive a 10-year-old Honda, live in a fifth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that's gentrifying but not quite there yet, and you volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends when your schedule allows. The casual invasion of her privacy should have terrified her. Instead, Eva felt something else, a cold realization that she'd been swimming in waters far deeper than she'd understood, that Dominic Ashford had been aware of her existence long before tonight, that Kian's relationship with her had been under surveillance she'd never detected. You had me investigated, thoroughly. You came back clean, which is more than I can say for the last 3 women Kian brought around. Dominic gestured toward the library with elegant economy of movement. Walk with me. 5 minutes. If you don't like what I have to say, you'll never see me again. You can walk out that door and return to your life, and I'll ensure my son doesn't bother you further. Every rational bone in Eva's body screamed at her to refuse to walk out the door and never look back, to cut her losses and rebuild her life away from the Ashford family and their dangerous world. But something else stirred beneath the shock and hurt, something darker that wanted to see Kian's face when he realized the magnitude of what he'd lost. Something that whispered maybe walking away wasn't strength, but just another form of letting herself be disposable. 5 minutes. The library was all leather and dark wood bookshelves lined with first editions that were probably worth more than most people's retirement funds. Dominic moved to the bar, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses without asking if she wanted one. He handed her a glass, then gestured for her to sit. Eva remained standing, a small rebellion that made one corner of his mouth quirk upward in what might have been approval. What exactly are you proposing, marriage? He said it like he was suggesting coffee, the word landing with such casual weight that Eva's brain stuttered, trying to process the absurdity. You can't be serious. I'm always serious when it comes to business. And make no mistake, this would be a business arrangement. Dominic took a measured sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. You marry me. You take the Ashford name. You become part of this family in the most official, most public way possible. That's insane. You're 22 years your senior. Yes, I'm aware. Dominic didn't seem offended by what she'd almost said. But I'm also wealthy, powerful, and capable of giving you a life most people only dream about. More importantly, I can give you what you really want right now. Revenge so complete, so devastating that your ex-boyfriend will spend the rest of his life regretting what he threw away. By marrying you, his father. Eva shook her head, the whiskey in her glass catching lamplight like trapped fire. That's not revenge. That's psychological warfare. Exactly. Dominic's smile was blade-thin, sharp enough to cut. Kian has spent his entire life competing with me for power, respect, legacy. Now imagine his humiliation when the woman he betrayed, the woman he considered too ordinary for his world, becomes his stepmother. When she sits at the head of this table, when she bears the Ashford name and commands the respect he takes for granted, when every family gathering for the rest of his life is a reminder of what his carelessness cost him. The cruelty of it took Eva's breath away, the calculated brutality of using her heartbreak as ammunition in a father-son war that had clearly been brewing long before she'd entered the picture. But underneath the shock, something else hummed, a dark satisfaction at the image Dominic painted at Kian's face when he realized she wasn't just walking away, but walking into something that would destroy him more thoroughly than any breakup ever could. Why would you do that to your own son? Because he needs to learn that his actions matter, that he can't simply charm his way out of consequences. Dominic set down his glass with deliberate precision. And because you intrigue me, Evangeline Marlowe. You walked in on a scene that would have sent most women into hysterics, and you left with your head high and your dignity intact. That kind of composure is rare, valuable. I'm not some prize to be won in your family power games. No, you're not. You're a woman who's been wronged, who deserves better than crying into her pillow while the people who hurt her move on without consequence. Dominic moved closer, and Eva forced herself not to retreat, not to show the fear that was mixing with anger and something else she couldn't quite name. I'm offering you power protection, a position in a world that usually chews up and spits out people like you. All I ask in return is that you play the role convincingly. Play the role. You mean pretend to love you? Love has nothing to do with this. I'm talking about a partnership. His voice dropped lower, more intimate, the timbre of it doing something to her nervous system that she absolutely did not want to examine. You'd live here, attend family functions, present the image of a devoted wife. In exchange, you'd have access to resources most people can't imagine. Want to expand Hope Harbor's reach? Done. Want to wipe out your student loans? Consider it handled. Want to ensure that no one ever hurts you again? His eyes glittered like dark ice. That's what being an Ashford guarantees. Power, protection, respect. The things Kian should have given you but was too weak and stupid to understand you deserved. What about what I want long-term? Eva heard herself asking, her voice steadier than she felt, her mind spinning through implications and consequences faster than she could fully process. What happens when I want out? When I want a real relationship with someone I actually choose? We'd establish terms, a timeline. This doesn't have to be forever, though I reserve the right to renegotiate if circumstances change. Dominic paused, something shifting in his expression that made him look almost human, almost vulnerable beneath the calculated control. But I'll be honest with you, Evangeline. The moment you take my name, your life changes permanently. You'll see things, know things, be part of things that will make you understand why people fear the Ashford family. There's no going back to who you were before. That version of you dies the day we marry. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to give you informed consent. The clinical phrasing should have been absurd, but Dominic said it with such matter-of-fact sincerity that Eva almost laughed. If you say yes to this, you need to understand what you're accepting. The danger. The violence that exists at the edges of my world. The fact that my enemies will see you as leverage and my allies will test you to see if you're worthy of the name. You'll be watched, judged, threatened. Some people will try to use you to get to me. Others will try to hurt you just to prove they can. And if I fail those tests, you won't. Dominic said it with absolute certainty, as if he could see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. I've survived in this business for 25 years by reading people accurately. You have something most people lack, the ability to adapt without losing yourself. That's what makes you perfect for this. You're strong enough to survive my world without becoming something you'd hate. That's rarer than you think. Eva looked down at the untouched whiskey in her hand, watching light refract through the crystal in patterns that felt like a metaphor she couldn't quite grasp. Upstairs, Kian was probably spinning some explanation to Celeste, or maybe they were laughing about her dramatic exit, or maybe they'd already moved on to round 2 without giving her a second thought. Tomorrow they'd continue their affair without consequence, without guilt, without any understanding of what they'd destroyed. The thought ignited something dark and fierce in her chest, something that had been building through 4 years of helping women who'd been used and discarded, through watching men face minimal consequences for maximum damage, through being told she was too soft, too naive, too good for the real world, where power and ruthlessness won and compassion got you stepped on. If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, what would the actual arrangement look like? Dominic's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, like a chess player recognizing a worthy opponent's opening move. We'd marry within the month. Quick engagement, very private ceremony, though the announcement would be extremely public. You'd move into the east wing of this house, separate quarters with complete privacy. We'd share certain spaces for appearances, dinners, family gatherings, public events. I'd expect discretion, loyalty, and the ability to handle yourself in difficult situations. He enumerated each point like contract terms, clinical and precise. In return, financial security beyond what you've ever imagined, protection from anyone who might wish you harm, access to resources that could expand your nonprofit work exponentially. Imagine what you could do for trafficking victims with actual funding, political connections, legal muscle. You could save hundreds of women instead of dozens. You could build something that outlasts both of us. And the physical side, Eva forced herself to ask, heat crawling up her neck, even as she maintained eye contact. Are you expecting number? Dominic's interruption was clean, decisive. Unless you wanted that this would be a marriage in name only. I'm not interested in coercing anyone into my bed, Evangeline. If physical intimacy ever became part of our arrangement, it would be because we both wanted it, not because you felt obligated. The answer should have been reassuring. Instead, it raised more questions about what kind of man Dominic Ashford actually was beneath the tailored suits and casual violence. What strange moral code allowed him to run a criminal empire while drawing lines around consent that most supposedly good men didn't bother with? "I need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow night." Dominic pulled a card from his jacket, holding it out with the same economy of movement that characterized everything he did. "Come to Giano's at 8. It's a restaurant I own. If you show up, I'll take that as your answer. If you don't, we'll never speak of this conversation again, and I'll ensure Kian leaves you alone to rebuild your life in peace." Eva took the card, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The contact sent another jolt through her nervous system, heat and electricity that made her wonder what she was actually considering, what line she was about to cross that couldn't be uncrossed once her foot left solid ground. "One more thing." Dominic's voice stopped her as she turned toward the door. "That friend of yours, Celeste. She's been feeding information about Kian to the Wolf Cartel for 3 months. They're rivals of ours, in case you weren't aware. Kian's too blinded by sex to see he's being played by someone far more dangerous than he understands." Eva stopped the information, landing like another blow on top of everything else. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that the betrayal you witnessed upstairs goes deeper than infidelity. She was never your friend, Evangeline. She's an operative using both you and my idiot son for her own agenda, for money and leverage in a game neither of you knew you were playing." Dominic's voice hardened, taking on an edge that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. "If you walk away now, fine. But know that the people who hurt you are worse than you imagine, and they'll never face consequences unless someone makes them. The world isn't fair. It's brutal and calculating, and it rewards those who understand power dynamics better than those who believe in justice. You can keep being the good girl who gets hurt, or you can become something else. Someone who hurts back." The words settled over Eva like a mantle, heavy and dark and seductive in their brutal honesty. She left without responding, walking through the mansion's halls that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a fortress past artwork that probably represented more wealth than most people saw in lifetimes, out into the November night that had gone fully dark while she'd been inside having her life dismantled and rebuilt in the span of an hour. She sat in her Honda for 20 minutes, hands shaking too badly to turn the key. Dominic's card on the passenger seat like a live grenade. Giano's tomorrow at 8. A simple dinner that would change the trajectory of her entire existence, that would transform her from Evangeline Marlowe social worker into something she couldn't fully envision, but could feel lurking at the edges of her imagination like a shadow gaining substance. Her phone buzzed in her purse. 17 missed calls from Kian. 32 text messages, each one some variation of "let me explain," or "it's not what you think," or "please call me back." She blocked his number without reading them, all the decisiveness of the action feeling both petty and powerful. Then she drove home to her 5th-floor walk-up, climbed stairs that always smelled like someone's curry dinner, and locked herself in her apartment that suddenly felt suffocating in its smallness, its safety, its ordinariness. That night, Eva didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, researching Dominic Ashford with the thoroughness she usually reserved for case files at work. What she found painted a picture of a man who'd inherited his father's criminal empire at 23 after a car bomb assassination that had never been solved, who'd expanded it into something that touched everything from construction to shipping to waste management, all the legitimate businesses providing cover for the ones that weren't. But there were other details too. Things that didn't fit the monster narrative: donations to children's hospitals, always anonymous but traceable if you knew where to look. A scholarship fund for underprivileged kids interested in business. And buried deep in Hope Harbor's grant history, a substantial donation 3 years ago given through a shell company that she now realized connected back to Ashford interests. Dominic Ashford had been funding her nonprofit. He'd been supporting her work before he'd ever met her, before Kian had brought her into the family orbit, before any of this had started spinning toward whatever conclusion was barreling toward her like a freight train she could see but couldn't seem to step away from. The revelation should have felt manipulative, like another chess move in whatever game he was playing. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something she'd sensed during their conversation, that Dominic Ashford was far more complicated than the monster Kian's behavior had implied, that he operated by rules that made sense in a world she'd only glimpsed through the women she helped at Hope Harbor. Women who'd survived by learning when to fight and when to adapt and when to become something new entirely. Morning came without sleep, without answers, with only the certainty that she couldn't go back to work and face her supervisor's concerned questions, couldn't sit in her office and counsel trafficking victims about agency and choice when her own life had just been shattered by betrayal she'd been too naive to see coming. She called in sick for the first time in 3 years, her voice steady enough that the lie passed without challenge. The day stretched like taffy, each hour longer than the last. She made lists, pros and cons, rational arguments for why this was insane, equally rational arguments for why walking away meant letting Kian and Celeste win, meant returning to a life that suddenly felt like playing small, like accepting that good girls finished last and bad boys got away with everything, and the world rewarded ruthlessness while punishing compassion. By 7 that evening, she still hadn't decided. By 7:30, she was in the shower washing her hair for the second time that day, her hands moving on autopilot while her brain spun in circles. By 7:45, she was standing in front of her closet staring at clothes that all seemed wrong for dinner with a Mafia kingpin who'd proposed a marriage of vengeance. At 8:15, Eva walked into Giano's wearing a simple black dress and heels that made her ankles wobble, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. The restaurant was elegant in that understated way that screamed wealth. No prices on menus, no visible staff unless you needed them, lighting designed to make everyone look like they belonged in a European film. Dominic sat at a corner table perfectly positioned to see the entire room while keeping his back to the wall. He stood when he saw her, and Eva felt the weight of every decision she'd ever made leading to this moment, felt the future splitting into 2 paths, one safe and small and familiar, the other dangerous and vast and utterly unknown. "You came." His voice held something that might have been surprise or satisfaction or relief carefully controlled. "I came." Eva let him pull out her chair, let herself sink into leather that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Let the moment settle over her like a coat she was trying on to see if it fit. A waiter appeared with wine before she'd even fully settled the bottle. Already opened, the glass poured with practiced efficiency that suggested Dominic had ordered ahead, had known she'd show up despite her uncertainty, had seen something in her that she was only beginning to recognize in herself. The wine was a Bordeaux that probably cost more than Eva's weekly grocery budget, dark and complex with notes she couldn't name, but could taste cherry and tobacco and something earthy that reminded her of autumn forests after rain. Dominic watched her take that first sip with the focus of someone cataloging reactions, reading her the way she'd learned to read trauma survivors looking for tells that revealed more than words ever could. "Have you eaten?" "Not since yesterday." Eva realized it was true as she said it, her stomach a knot of anxiety and anger that had made food impossible, that had turned every normal human need into something her body had forgotten how to process. Food seemed impossible. Dominic signaled the waiter without breaking eye contact, ordered in rapid Italian, that made her aware of how much she didn't know about him, how much she'd be entering blindly if she said yes to this insane proposition. The waiter disappeared like smoke, leaving them alone in a bubble of privacy that the restaurant's other patrons seemed to instinctively respect, as if Dominic Ashford's mere presence created invisible boundaries that people knew better than to cross. "I assume you have questions." 1,000. Eva took another sip of wine to steady herself, the alcohol warming her from the inside out in a way that felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. "But let's start with the most important one. Why me? You could marry anyone. Someone from your world. Someone who understands the rules, who wouldn't need to be brought up to speed on how this all works. Because someone from my world would have expectations I'm not interested in meeting. They'd want power for themselves, would see marriage to me as a stepping stone to their own ambitions." Dominic's fingers traced the stem of his wineglass with unconscious elegance, the movement hypnotic in its precision. "You want revenge, yes. But beyond that, you want to continue your work. Help people make a difference in ways that have nothing to do with my business. That makes you safe. Predictable in the best possible way. I'm not sure whether to be offended by that. Don't be. Predictability is valuable in my world. Most people are chaos dressed up as ambition, constantly scheming, constantly looking for angles to exploit. You have clear boundaries and won't try to expand them at my expense. You have integrity, which is rarer than you might think. Their first course arrived something with scallops that looked like edible art arranged on the plate with the kind of precision that suggested the chef took their work very seriously. Eva picked up her fork, suddenly ravenous despite the circumstances, or maybe because of them. Survival instinct kicking in, reminding her body that it needed fuel even when her emotions were in free fall. What happens to Kian? He learns that consequences exist. Beyond that, it's not my concern. Dominic cut into his scallop with surgical precision, each movement controlled and deliberate. He'll continue to work in the family business, at least for now. I won't cut him off completely. That would be too obvious, too punitive in ways that would undermine the lesson. But his position will change. His standing in our world will shift. People will know that he disrespected someone under my protection and that I took action. That matters more than you might understand. By marrying the woman he cheated on. By honoring someone he treated as disposable. The correction was subtle but significant. A reframing that made Eva see the move differently. Not just revenge dressed as matrimony, but a statement about value and worth that would resonate through whatever Byzantine power structure governed Dominic's empire. In my world, how you treat those weaker than you matters. Kian forgot that, or perhaps he never learned it in the first place. Either way, the education starts now. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the food extraordinary in ways that made Eva understand money as a language she'd never fully learned to speak. Each bite a reminder of the life Dominic was offering, where scallops cost more than her weekly groceries, where wine came from vineyards she couldn't pronounce, where every detail was curated and controlled by people paid to make perfection look effortless. I need guarantees. Eva set down her fork, meeting his eyes across candlelight that turned his features into something both softer and more dangerous. Legal guarantees about my safety, my autonomy, my ability to walk away if this becomes unbearable. We'll have a prenuptial agreement drawn up by tomorrow afternoon. I'll have my lawyers include clauses protecting your interests. Financial settlement if we divorce, assurances about your physical safety terms around the marriage itself. Dominic seemed unsurprised by her demand, as if he'd expected it, respected it even. Anything else? My work. I need to keep working at Hope Harbor. I can't just become some trophy wife who shops and lunches while pretending the world isn't burning. Agreed. In fact, I'd prefer it. The best covers are built on truth, and your genuine dedication to that work makes our arrangement more believable. Plus, it gives you purpose beyond playing a role, which means you're less likely to crack under pressure. The clinical assessment should have bothered her, but Eva found it oddly reassuring evidence that Dominic understood psychology, that he'd thought through variables and failure points, that this wasn't just impulse wrapped in expensive suits. I can't believe I'm actually considering this. Neither can I, if I'm being honest. The admission caught her off guard, a crack in the armor that revealed something human underneath. I expected you to walk away to decide that revenge wasn't worth the cost. The fact that you're still sitting here says something about either your courage or your capacity for calculated risk. I'm interested to see which one it is. Maybe both. Eva surprised herself with the truth. Maybe I'm tired of being the person who gets hurt while everyone else moves on without consequences. Maybe I want to see what happens when I stop playing it safe. Then you have your answer. Dominic reached into his jacket, producing a small velvet box that made Eva's heart stutter against her ribs. He opened it to reveal a ring that probably cost more than her car, a square-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones set in platinum that caught the candlelight like trapped starlight, throwing prismatic patterns across the white tablecloth between them. This was my grandmother's. Something in his voice shifted, became almost gentle, a tone she hadn't heard from him before. She was a woman who survived things that would have broken most people. Married my grandfather during a war between families, became the bridge that ended decades of bloodshed. She understood that sometimes marriage is strategy, not romance. I think she'd appreciate what we're doing." Eva stared at the ring, at this family heirloom being offered as a prop in an elaborate revenge plot, at the weight of history and violence and survival it represented. The symbolism felt almost too perfect, too loaded with meaning. She wasn't sure she was ready to carry. "If I say yes, when would we actually get married?" 3 weeks. Long enough to plan something small, but public, short enough that the shock value remains high. Dominic held the box steady, not pushing it toward her, but not pulling it away either, giving her space to make the choice herself. "I've already spoken to a judge who owes me a favor. We can do the ceremony at my estate if you prefer privacy, or at the courthouse if you want more witnesses. Either way, it'll be legal and binding and permanent in all the ways that matter. I don't have family to invite. My parents are dead and I'm an only child. Then it will be intimate. My daughter Iris will attend. She's 16 and lives primarily with her mother in California, but she'll be here for the wedding. We'll need a few witnesses to make it legal. Beyond that, it can be as minimal as you want." The casual mention of a daughter jolted Eva out of whatever trance the ring had put her into. Of course Dominic had a child. He'd been married before, had a whole life that she knew nothing about family dynamics she couldn't begin to understand. She was agreeing to become this girl's stepmother, to insert herself into relationships that predated her existence, to claim a position she hadn't earned through any normal progression of events. "What does Iris know about why we're getting married?" "Nothing yet. I'll tell her it's complicated, which she'll accept because she's familiar with complicated. Her mother and I divorced when she was 4, and she spent her whole life navigating the reality of who I am and what I do." Dominic's expression softened almost imperceptibly when he mentioned his daughter, a tell that revealed more than he probably intended. "She's a smart girl, perceptive in ways that sometimes unnerve people. She'll figure out eventually that this isn't a conventional marriage, but she'll also see how you treat her, and that will matter more than the circumstances." Eva closed her eyes, trying to imagine her life 3 weeks from now. Living in the Ashford mansion, wearing this ring that weighed more than it should, being introduced as Mrs. Dominic Ashford at functions where everyone would whisper about the age gap, the scandal, the sheer audacity of it all. And Kian's face when he found out the devastation, the humiliation, the karmic justice of it all. She opened her eyes and held out her left hand. Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger without ceremony, without the romantic flourish that men usually employed during proposals. It fit perfectly, which made her wonder if he'd somehow known her ring size, or if his grandmother had simply had small hands like hers, or if this was just another example of the universe conspiring to push her toward a decision that felt both inevitable and insane. "So we're doing this." Eva heard the words come out of her mouth, heard them land in the space between them like a contract being signed, like a door closing on one version of her life and opening onto something entirely unknown. "We're doing this," Dominic confirmed, lifting his wine glass in a toast that felt more business than celebration. "To revenge, partnership, and the beginning of a very interesting arrangement." Eva clinked her glass against his, sealing a deal that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, about justice, about how far she was willing to go when someone pushed her too far. The wine tasted different now, less like luxury, and more like liquid courage, something to fortify her for the transformation that had already begun the moment she'd walked through those restaurant doors. The rest of dinner passed in discussion of logistics that made the surreal situation feel almost mundane. Dominic explained the prenuptial process with the same tone someone might use to discuss furniture delivery, clinical and precise. His lawyer would have documents ready by tomorrow afternoon. They'd review every clause together, negotiate terms until Eva felt protected, make it ironclad in ways that would survive any legal challenge. She'd retain separate banking accounts, assets acquired during the marriage split equitably, the right to separate legal counsel at any time. If children were born, though they both acknowledged that was unlikely, given the nature of their arrangement, custody would be negotiated separately with the child's best interest paramount. The business-like discussion of hypothetical children born into a marriage designed to punish Dominic's son made Eva's stomach turn, but she forced herself to listen to understand exactly what she was signing. This wasn't romance. This was a contract with consequences that would ripple through years she couldn't predict, shaping a future she was choosing blindly because the present had become unbearable. 3 weeks later, reality had shifted so completely that Eva's old life felt like something that had happened to someone else. The morning after dinner at Giano's, she'd woken to find professional movers already at her apartment, packing her life into boxes with efficient speed. Dominic had bought her building overnight, literally bought the entire structure, terminated her lease with compensation to her and the other tenants being relocated, made her housing situation disappear like it had never existed. The casual display of power should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like confirmation that she'd made the right choice, that this man could reshape reality with phone calls and money, while Kian could only reshape her heart with lies and betrayal. The Ashford Estate's East Wing became her new home, a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment had been. Blue and gray colors matching her old place, her books already unpacked and shelved, fresh flowers on every surface. Someone had studied her life with forensic attention, had replicated comfort while upgrading everything else. The bed was larger, the linens softer, the bathroom marble and heated floors. A study overlooked gardens that stretched for acres, manicured and beautiful in ways that required armies of people she'd never see. Training started immediately. Thorne, head of security, looked like he'd been carved from granite, late 40s. Former military eyes that had seen combat and come back changed. He taught Eva to recognize danger, to vary her routes, to check her car for tampering, to know when she was being followed. The encrypted phone he gave her had Dominic's number programmed as the only contact, a panic button hidden behind what looked like a standard camera app. You press this for 3 seconds, every Ashford security asset in Chicago gets your location. Help comes. Always. Thorne's voice held the conviction of someone who'd seen what happened when help didn't come, when protocols failed, when civilians got caught in crossfire they didn't understand was happening. Mr. Ashford doesn't take chances with people under his protection. You're under his protection now. That means something in our world. Day 4 brought firearms training in the mansion's basement range, a space Eva hadn't known existed, hadn't imagined when she'd visited as Kian's girlfriend, and thought she understood this house. Dominic taught her personally, standing close enough that she could feel his body heat, smell that expensive cologne that had become familiar faster than it should have. His hands adjusted her grip, his voice low and steady in her ear. Stance wider. Breathe out when you pull the trigger. Don't anticipate the recoil, just let it happen. The gun felt wrong in her hands, heavier than she'd expected, the weight of potential violence making her fingers tremble. But when she fired and hit the target, not center mass but close enough, Dominic's approval was immediate and visceral, a warm hand on her shoulder, a whispered good that sent heat through her entire body in ways that had nothing to do with gunpowder or adrenaline. Natural talent. We'll build on that. His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary, or maybe Eva just imagined it reading chemistry into proximity, because her life had become so strange that attraction to a man old enough to be her father somehow made more sense than anything else that was happening. Day 7 brought the first real test dinner with allied families, men who ran territories adjacent to Ashford interests who'd come to assess whether Dominic's engagement was strength or weakness, whether his young fiancée was an asset or a liability. Eva wore a dress Dominic had selected, emerald silk that cost more than she used to make in a month, and jewelry that required security escorts. She felt like a child playing dress-up until she caught her reflection and saw someone else looking back. A woman who belonged at this table, who could hold her own against scrutiny that would have destroyed the person she'd been 3 weeks ago. My fiancée. Dominic's introduction was simple, his hand at the small of her back, possessive without being aggressive. She's under my protection, make note. The other men nodded, some with approval, others with calculation that made Eva understand she was being catalogued as potential weakness, a soft target they could exploit if circumstances shifted. But Dominic's presence beside her was a wall between her and their assessment, his quiet authority making it clear that testing his protection would be the last mistake anyone made. After in the car ride back to the estate, Eva's hands finally stopped shaking. You did well. Most people crumble their first time facing that level of scrutiny. I've negotiated with ICE agents and corrupt cops trying to deport trafficking victims back to their abusers. These guys are just better dressed. The comparison made Dominic laugh, a genuine sound she'd never heard from him before, and something in her chest loosened at the knowledge that she could surprise him, could earn respect instead of just playing a role he'd written for her. That night they had their first real conversation, the kind that went past strategy and into territory that felt dangerous because it was honest. Eva found Dominic in the library at 1 a.m. reading with whiskey keeping him company, and somehow 3 hours evaporated while they talked about everything that mattered and nothing that did. He told her about inheriting the empire at 23 when his father's car exploded in a parking garage, about learning to lead through violence and fear until he was smart enough to add strategy to the mix, about building something that would outlast him because legacy was the only immortality available to men who lived the way he lived. Eva shared stories about her parents, about choosing social work because she'd wanted to fix things they couldn't reach, about the first trafficking victim she'd helped, a girl barely 16 who'd been sold by her own uncle, who'd survived things that should have killed her spirit, but somehow came out the other side still capable of hope. The work mattered because someone had to witness that survival had to provide resources and safety and belief that escape was possible, even when the world felt like a cage designed by people who profited from pain. "I've never let anyone see this side." Dominic's admission came around 3 a.m. when exhaustion had lowered the walls they both usually maintained. "The tired man, not the Don. I've never felt safe enough to admit I'm lonely." Eva surprised herself with the confession. Always the helper, never helped. Always strong for everyone else because someone has to be. They fell asleep on the library couch together, not sexual but companionable. Two people who'd found unexpected understanding in the space between revenge and partnership. Thorne found them at dawn, and the slight smile that crossed his usually stoic face told Eva that something had shifted, that Dominic's inner circle saw the change and approved in ways that mattered more than she'd understood. Day 9 brought the poisoning. Family dinner with Iris, present the teenager having arrived from California that afternoon, sharp and assessing with her father's eyes, and a wariness that came from growing up between two worlds. The wine tasted fine at first, then Eva's vision started tunneling, the room spinning in ways that had nothing to do with alcohol. She tried to stand, and her legs gave out, the floor rushing up to meet her before Dominic caught her, his arms solid and sure, his voice cutting through the chaos with commands that sounded like orders being issued in combat. "Get the doctor, now. Lock down the estate. No one leaves until I know who did this." Eva woke in the mansion's medical wing, a facility she hadn't known existed, complete with equipment that belonged in hospitals and staff who looked like they'd treated gunshot wounds in places without anesthesia. The doctor confirmed arsenic low dose, but intentional, meant to warn or sicken rather than kill. Dominic sat beside her bed, and the rage in his eyes was cold, fire-controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than any outburst would have been. "Someone in my house tried to kill you." His voice was quiet, lethal, the tone of a man calculating exactly how much pain he could inflict before death became mercy. "That's unacceptable. Intolerable. I'm going to find who did this, and I'm going to make an example that ensures it never happens again." Eva should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else, a dark satisfaction that someone cared enough to go to war over her safety, that she mattered enough to warrant violence in her defense. The thought should have horrified her, should have been evidence that she was losing herself to this world faster than she'd anticipated. But lying in that medical bed with Dominic's hand wrapped around hers, Eva couldn't bring herself to care about the moral implications of finding comfort in promised retribution. The interrogation took 4 hours. Dominic questioned every staff member personally, his presence filling rooms until people confessed to sins they hadn't committed just to escape the weight of his attention. The housekeeper broke fastest, a woman in her 50s who'd worked for the family for a decade, who'd taken $50,000 from someone connected to the Wolf cartel, who'd put poison in Eva's wine because that's what the money was for, and she had gambling debts that made rational decisions impossible. Dominic gave Eva a choice, his voice empty of inflection. "I need to handle this. You can look away or you can watch. But either way, she doesn't walk out of here alive. People who try to kill what's mine don't get second chances." Eva should have looked away, should have gone back to her room and let Dominic handle violence in the darkness, where she could pretend it wasn't happening, where she could maintain some separation between who she'd been and who she was becoming. But she'd spent 4 years helping women who'd been hurt by men who faced no consequences, who walked free because the systems designed to protect victims were designed by people who didn't care if those victims lived or died. Do what you need to do. Her voice was steadier than she felt, and Dominic's eyes registered something: approval, concern, recognition that she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The gunshot came from somewhere in the mansion's depths, muffled by walls and distance but unmistakable. Eva flinched, but didn't look away from Dominic when he returned a bloodstain on his cuff, the only evidence of what had happened in rooms she'd never see, violence she'd sanctioned through silence and acceptance. "It's done. No one threatens you again." He said it like a vow, and Eva believed him. That night she couldn't sleep. PTSD from proximity to death making every shadow a threat, every sound a potential attack. She knocked on Dominic's door at 2 a.m, found him awake and unsurprised, like he'd been expecting her, waiting for the moment when the reality of their world would hit her hard enough to send her looking for comfort she couldn't find alone. "I keep hearing the gunshot." Her voice was smaller than she wanted, but honest in ways she'd stopped being with most people. "I know she tried to kill me. I know she deserved consequences, but I can't stop thinking about the fact that my being here got someone killed. The first kill is always the hardest, even when you don't pull the trigger yourself." Dominic pulled her into the room, closed the door, created a bubble of privacy where honesty could exist without judgment. "I was 15. Self-defense, but that doesn't make the memory easier to carry. The guilt never leaves completely. You learn to live with it, to carry that weight as part of the price of survival." They talked until dawn, and somewhere in those hours Eva stopped seeing Dominic Ashford, the crime lord, and started seeing just Dominic, a man who'd been forced to become hard because soft people didn't survive the world he'd inherited, who'd built walls so thick nothing could get through until somehow Eva had slipped past defenses he'd forgotten he'd lowered. At 4:30, when exhaustion had stripped away every pretense, Eva kissed him. Not calculated, not strategic, just honest need for connection with someone who understood the darkness she was learning to navigate. He responded carefully at first, giving her space to pull back, to change her mind, to maintain whatever boundaries she needed. But when she didn't retreat, when her hands tangled in his hair and pulled him closer, the kiss deepened into something that tasted like surrender and claiming in equal measure. His mouth was demanding and careful, simultaneously taking what she offered while still letting her control the pace, his hands framing her face like she was something precious and dangerous that required both reverence and caution. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, the air between them felt charged with possibilities neither had planned, but both wanted. That changed things. His whisper was rough, honest, more admission than observation. "I know." Eva's heart hammered against her ribs, lips swollen, body humming with want that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the man currently looking at her like she was water in a desert he'd been crossing for decades. "No going back now." "I don't want to go back." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. Day 14 brought the assassination attempt that would later define everything. Eva had insisted on going to Hope Harbor's office, needing normalcy, needing to remember who she'd been before Dominic Ashford had walked into her life and offered to make her someone new. Dominic had been reluctant, his control issues flaring, but Eva had pushed back because this was the line, her work, her purpose, the thing that couldn't be negotiated away, even for safety. 3 bodyguards accompanied her, Hayes driving Cade in the passenger seat, Thorne following in a second vehicle. Professional, alert, trained for scenarios Eva hoped would never materialize. The intersection of State and Madison was crowded with afternoon traffic, pedestrians crossing between cars, the ordinary chaos of Chicago on a Tuesday that felt so normal, Eva almost forgot to be afraid. Then the black Escalade ran the light metal, screaming as it T-boned their SUV on the driver's side. The world became slow-motion violence, glass exploding inward, the crunch of metal folding like paper. Eva's body thrown against the seatbelt hard enough to crack ribs, the taste of blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue. Hayes slumped over the wheel unconscious, or worse, blood running down his face from a gash across his forehead. Cade was screaming something, or maybe Eva was the one screaming, sound distorting until everything was just noise and pain and terror. "Move," They're coming! Cade's hands were on her, dragging her from the wreckage through a door that didn't want to open, metal bent and jammed until he kicked it with force that suggested panic overriding training. 4 men emerged from the escalade with weapons drawn, moving with military precision that said this wasn't random, wasn't accident, was targeted violence designed to kill or capture. Thorne's backup vehicle screeched around the corner. 6 Ashford soldiers spilling out with the kind of overwhelming force that turned the intersection into a war zone. Civilians scattered screaming, diving behind cars while bullets tore through the afternoon air. Cade pushed Eva behind their destroyed SUV, pressing a gun into her hands. You remember the training. Point, breathe, shoot. Don't think, just survive. His voice was steady despite the chaos, despite Hayes bleeding out in the front seat, despite enemies advancing with clear intent to finish what they'd started. Eva's hands shook so badly she almost dropped the weapon. But muscle memory from Dominic's training kicked in, stance, breathing, focus narrowing to just the target advancing toward their position. She pulled the trigger and the gun kicked back harder than she'd expected, but the wolf soldier went down, red blooming across his chest, his expression surprised like he hadn't anticipated the victim shooting back. Eva had killed someone, had taken a life with her own hands, made a choice that couldn't be unmade, crossed from witness to participant in violence that would follow her forever. The shock froze her, locked her muscles, made her forget that 1 down meant 3 still coming. Cade returned fire, dropping another, but took a bullet to the shoulder that spun him around, sent him stumbling. Then Dominic arrived with a convoy that looked like military deployment. 8 vehicles, 30 heavily armed men, overwhelming force that turned the tide instantly. The remaining wolf soldiers tried to surrender, but Dominic's people were past negotiation, past mercy, executing with efficiency that said this was personal, that attacking Eva meant war, and war meant no prisoners. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving only sirens approaching and smoke drifting through air that smelled like cordite and blood. Dominic was there, hands on Eva's face, checking for injuries with touch that shook despite his usual control. "Are you hurt?" His voice cracked on the question, revealing depths of feeling he'd been hiding behind strategy and contracts. "I killed someone," Eva heard herself say it, the confession tumbling out before she could filter or process. "I actually killed someone. I can see his face. I can see—" "You survived." Dominic pulled her against his chest, his arms creating a fortress between her and the carnage. "That's what matters. You're alive because you fought back. Never apologize for surviving, but the man I shot came here to kill you, or take you. Either way, he made his choice, and you made yours." Dominic's hand stroked her hair, the tenderness at odds with the violence still smoking around them. "I've got you. Always. I promise." The promise settled something in Eva's chest, made the shaking stop, made the world narrow to just his heartbeat steady under her ear, and his arms solid enough to hold her together when she felt like breaking apart. This was real now, not strategy or revenge or business arrangement. This was Dominic Ashford willing to burn Chicago to ash if it meant keeping her safe, and Eva Marlowe discovering she was capable of killing to stay alive. That survival instinct ran deeper than morality when bullets were flying and death was close enough to smell. The War Council convened at 3 a.m, Dominic's inner circle gathering in the basement war room Eva hadn't known existed until tonight. Thorne stood despite the bandage wrapping his ribs where a bullet had grazed close enough to leave a burn. Hayes was in the medical wing getting stitches, alive but concussed. Cade's shoulder was wrapped, his arm in a sling, but he'd refused to miss this meeting. 3 other lieutenants Eva had only seen in passing filled out the table. Hard men with scarred hands and eyes that had witnessed things civilians weren't supposed to know about. Dominic presided at the head, every inch the Don Eva had heard about, but never fully witnessed. His presence filled the room differently. Here authority, absolute commands delivered with the expectation of immediate obedience. Eva sat to his right, the position making a statement she only partially understood, but recognized as significant based on how the men's eyes tracked the placement. The Wolf Cartel declared war the moment they ran that light. Dominic's voice was ice over steel, cold enough to freeze but hard enough to cut. "They killed Hayes's brother last year." They've been pushing into our territory for 6 months, and now they tried to take my fiancée in broad daylight on a public street. That's not strategy. That's desperation dressed as boldness. Thorne pulled up surveillance footage on screens that descended from the ceiling showing angles Eva hadn't known were being recorded, traffic cameras building security, even a drone feed that suggested Ashford resources extended into technology she couldn't begin to fathom. The attack played out in high definition, clinical and brutal, showing her own face frozen in shock, Cade dragging her from wreckage the moment she'd pulled the trigger and ended a life. 3 targets. Thorne's finger tapped the screen, highlighting locations. Wolf Cartel operates out of Warehouse District near the port. They run shipments through dummy corporations here and here. Their money gets laundered through a casino downtown fronted as a nightclub. We hit all 3 simultaneously. We cripple their operation completely. When tonight, 3 a.m., we have 6 hours to position teams. Dominic turned to Eva, his expression unreadable. You don't have to be here for this part. This is the ugly machinery that keeps empires running. I want to stay. Eva's voice was steadier than she felt, but the tremor underneath revealed how close she was to breaking. If I'm going to be part of this world, I need to see all of it. No illusions, no protected ignorance. Show me what you really do. Something shifted in Dominic's eyes, pride mixed with concern, respect tangled with reluctance. He nodded once, then turned back to the screens. 3 teams. Thorne, you take the warehouse. I want their product burned, every brick of cocaine turned to ash. Cade, despite that shoulder, you're on the casino. Freeze their accounts. Seize what you can, expose the laundering to authorities we don't control. Hayes's brother deserves that much. And the shipping? That's mine. Dominic's smile was blade thin. I'm going to sink 2 cargo ships and make sure the insurance fraud gets traced back to them. The Wolves think they're untouchable because they've diversified. I'm going to show them that empires fall when you attack the wrong person's family. The way he said family made Eva's breath catch, made her understand that somewhere in the past 3 weeks she'd stopped being a pawn in a revenge plot and started being something else entirely. Someone Dominic would go to war for, someone whose safety mattered more than strategy or profit, or the carefully maintained balance of power that kept Chicago's underworld from tearing itself apart. What about me? Eva heard herself ask, needing to contribute, needing to be more than just the damsel these men had died protecting. I can help. I'm not useless. You're the reason we're doing this. Dominic's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid and anchoring. Your job is to stay safe while we eliminate the threat. But, he paused, considering. You made a good point earlier about financial warfare lasting longer than violence. What would you suggest? Eva's mind raced, pulling from years of tracking trafficking networks, following money trails that led to shell companies and offshore accounts, understanding how criminal enterprises hid in plain sight by looking legitimate. The Wolf Cartel wasn't that different from the organizations she'd studied, just bigger, more violent, more entrenched in systems designed to hide dirty money behind clean facades. Their casino is the weak point. If you can prove the money laundering, you don't just hurt them financially. You get law enforcement involved in ways they can't buy off. Federal charges mean federal prisons, no local corruption to grease the wheels. Eva leaned forward, warming to the strategy. Plus, it sends a message to your other enemies: attack the Ashfords, and you don't just lose territory, you lose everything, freedom included. The men around the table exchanged glances, something like respect flickering across faces that had probably dismissed her as decorative until this moment. Thorne actually smiled, a rare expression that transformed his granite features into something almost human. Mrs. Ashford has a strategic mind. She's not Mrs. Ashford yet. Dominic's correction was automatic, but his eyes held warmth when they met Eva's. But yes, she does, and that's exactly what we'll do. The teams deployed 2 hours later, Eva watching from the war room as 3 separate operations unfolded across Chicago's darkness. Dominic commanded from the estate, his voice calm and precise through encrypted channels, directing movements like a conductor leading an orchestra through a symphony of controlled destruction. The warehouse went first. Thorne's team moving through darkness with night vision and overwhelming numbers, the firefight brief and brutal before flames began consuming product worth millions. The casino took longer, people working through electronic locks and security systems, freezing accounts while planting evidence that would survive legal scrutiny when federal agents came looking. The shipping docks were Dominic's masterpiece. Eva watched through drone footage as explosive charges planted by divers detonated beneath 2 cargo ships, hulls rupturing water, rushing in faster than pumps could compensate. The vessels listed groaned, began their slow descent into Chicago's harbor, while Dominic's people transmitted falsified insurance documents to authorities who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to justify raids they'd been planning for months. By dawn, the Wolf Cartel's infrastructure lay in ruins. $40 million in cocaine burned, $70 million in accounts frozen or seized, 2 ships sunk with cargo that would never reach buyers already paid in full, and federal warrants being drafted for arrests that would decimate their leadership before noon. Dominic's phone rang at 6:15 just as sun started painting the war room's screens in shades of gold. He answered, put it on speaker so Eva could hear. Ashford. The voice on the other end was rough, defeated, aged by the kind of stress that came from watching everything you'd built collapse in a single night. You've made your point. What do you want Garrett Wolf himself calling to surrender? Eva felt a savage satisfaction bloom in her chest, dark and fierce, and everything her old self would have been horrified to recognize in her own emotional landscape. Celeste Vaughn, delivered to me within the hour. And you leave Illinois within 72 hours. Territory operations, everything. Gone. Dominic's terms were absolute, non-negotiable, delivered with the calm of someone who knew he'd already won. The girl isn't worth this war. Garrett's capitulation came fast, confirming what Eva had suspected, that Celeste was expendable, a low-level asset the Wolves had used until she became a liability, that her friendship had been purchased for prices that made Eva's stomach turn. She'll be at your gate in 30 minutes. We're done here. The line went dead. Dominic set the phone down carefully, his shoulders finally relaxing. Now that the immediate threat had been neutralized, territory-secured message sent that would ripple through Chicago's underworld for years. Attacking Dominic Ashford's family meant total annihilation. It's over. Eva's question came out smaller than intended, exhaustion and adrenaline crash making her voice shake. For now, there will always be another threat, another challenger who thinks they can take what's mine. But the Wolves are finished, and anyone else considering similar moves just learned what happens when you cross lines I've drawn. He pulled Eva into his arms, the embrace fierce and protective and claiming, "You're safe. That's what matters." 2 hours later, Celeste Vaughn arrived, bound and terrified, delivered by Wolf enforcers who looked relieved to be rid of her, who drove away fast like they were afraid Dominic might change his mind about letting them leave breathing. She was dragged to the basement interrogation room, a space Eva had heard about but never seen until now. Concrete walls drain in the floor, the kind of sterile functionality that suggested it had been hosed down more times than she wanted to calculate. Dominic gave Eva the choice, his voice empty of inflection. You can walk away. Go upstairs, pretend this isn't happening. Or you can stay. Watch. Participate if you want. She used you, sold you to people who tried to kill you. The decision is yours. Eva should have walked away, should have maintained some separation between who she'd been 3 weeks ago and who she was becoming, should have preserved some part of herself that hadn't been contaminated by proximity to violence. But looking at Celeste, makeup smeared, expensive clothes torn, fear making her look younger than 26, Eva felt nothing but cold rage for every lie, every manipulation, every coffee date that had been reconnaissance disguised as friendship. I'm staying. The interrogation was clinical. Dominic didn't torture, didn't need to. He simply sat across from Celeste and waited while silence stretched, while her fear built, while she began confessing to things he hadn't even asked about yet. The Wolf Cartel had approached her 8 months ago at a gallery opening. They'd researched her friendship with Eva, had known she was close to Kian Ashford, had offered $500,000 to get close to the family and report back on operations, schedules, vulnerabilities. Seducing Kian had been her idea, a way to get deeper access faster than slow friendship could provide. She'd fed them information about shipment routes, meeting locations, security rotations. The affair had been strategic at first, then complicated when Kian actually fell for her, when guilt started eating at her, until the wolves reminded her what happened to informants who developed consciences at inconvenient times. What about Eva Dominic's question was quiet, dangerous in its simplicity. Was using her part of the assignment, or just bonus cruelty? Celeste's eyes found Eva's, and whatever she saw there made her flinch. Both. They wanted me close to you because you were Kian's weakness. If they needed leverage, you were the target. Being your friend gave me access to your apartment, your schedule, your life. I was supposed to help them grab you if it came to that. Eva's hands clenched, nails digging into palms hard enough to leave crescents. 4 years of friendship reduced to surveillance, every shared secret now a data point filed away for future exploitation. The betrayal was somehow worse than Kian's, more calculated, more thoroughly mercenary. Why, Eva's voice cracked, despite her effort to maintain control. We were friends. Real friends. Or was every moment a lie? Not every moment. Celeste's attempt at defense fell flat, hollow. I liked you. Sometimes. But I needed the money more than I needed a friend. My gallery was failing, debts piling up. The wolves offered a way out that didn't involve bankruptcy and humiliation. I took it. The brutal honesty was almost worse than lies would have been, the admission that Eva's value as a human being had been weighed against financial desperation and found wanting. The casualness of it, the ease with which Celeste had decided that friendship was worth less than $500,000, and an escape from consequences she'd brought on herself through poor business decisions. What happens to her? Eva turned to Dominic, needing to know what role she played in this. What moral responsibility came with staying in this room instead of walking away? That's your call. She betrayed you. She put you in danger. She's the reason wolf soldiers knew where to find you when you'd be vulnerable. You decide what justice looks like here. The weight of the decision settled on Eva's shoulders like physical mass. She could order Celeste's death with a word, could have revenge served as cold and final as a bullet. Part of her wanted exactly that, wanted to watch the fear in Celeste's eyes turn to understanding, that actions had consequences, that using people as pawns eventually meant becoming expendable yourself. But killing her would be mercy. Quick, clean, final. Let her live. Eva's words came out flat, emotionless, harder than rage would have been. Exile her. Blacklist her in every city that matters. Ruin her reputation. Make sure everyone knows she's an informant who sold out her own friends for money. Let her spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when the wolves will decide she knows too much to be allowed to exist, wondering if every new person she meets is another enemy wearing a friendly face. Dominic's expression shifted into something that might have been pride, or might have been recognition that Eva had finally crossed fully into his world, that she understood survival sometimes meant choosing consequences worse than death. Mercy is sometimes crueler than death. Well played. Celeste was removed within the hour, driven to the state line with $500 and a warning that returning to Illinois meant dying slowly. Her gallery, her apartment, her entire life in Chicago dismantled before she even reached the border. Eva watched her go and felt nothing. No regret, no guilt, just cold satisfaction that at least one person who'd hurt her would carry scars that never fully healed. The wedding was 5 days away when Kian finally made his appearance, sober and desperate in equal measure. He'd been calling Iris, begging his half-sister to arrange a meeting, claiming he needed to apologize properly. Needed Eva to understand that he'd loved her truly, even if he'd destroyed that love through stupidity and weakness. Iris, to her credit, asked Eva, before agreeing, her 16-year-old wisdom understanding that forcing confrontation could re-traumatize or provide closure depending on readiness. I'll see him. Eva made the decision quickly, needing to face Kian one final time before the wedding made everything permanent, before she became his stepmother, in ways that would twist their history into something grotesque and irreversible. Dominic insisted on being present, his protective instincts flaring, despite Eva's assurance she could handle a conversation with her ex-boyfriend without backup. They met in the library where this had all started, Kian looking smaller somehow than Eva remembered, diminished by sobriety and consequences, finally catching up to choices he'd made when he thought charm could erase any mistake. "You look different." Kian's observation was accurate. Eva had changed in visible ways over 3 weeks, her posture straighter, her gaze harder, her expensive clothes fitting like armor instead of costume. "You look beautiful but different, like you belong in this world now. What do you want?" Eva kept her voice level, refusing to give him the emotional response he was probably hoping for, the tears or anger that would confirm he still mattered enough to hurt her. To apologize. Really apologize, not the drunk rambling from before. Kian's hands twisted together, nervous energy making him look younger, more vulnerable. "I was an idiot, and I treated you like you were disposable because I could, because you were good and forgiving, and I took advantage of that. You deserved better than what I gave you." "Yes, I did." Eva's agreement seemed to deflate him further, like he'd hoped she might argue, might give him space to explain away his choices as anything other than selfishness dressed as complexity. "Is that all? Because if you came here looking for forgiveness, I'm not ready to give it. Maybe someday. Not today. I also came to warn you." Kian's voice dropped, urgency replacing contrition. "The Wolves called me 2 days ago. I know they're supposed to be leaving, but Garrett is desperate. He wants me to help sabotage the wedding to cause chaos during the ceremony. They're planning something." "Why are you telling us?" Dominic's question cut through his presence, a reminder that this library had witnessed their first meeting, that history was circling back on itself in ways that felt both inevitable and surreal. "Because she's family now." Kian met his father's eyes, something shifting between them that Eva couldn't fully read but recognized as significant. "And I won't let anyone hurt family, even if I lost her. Even if marrying you destroys me every day for the rest of my life. She deserves protection, happiness, things I couldn't give her, but maybe you can." The admission cost him something visible in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his voice cracked on happiness, like the word tasted bitter. But underneath the pain, Eva heard something else. Acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of it. Kian was finally learning what Dominic had been trying to teach, that actions had consequences, that you couldn't charm your way out of every mistake, that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone you'd hurt was step back and let them build something new without you. "What's the plan?" Dominic's tactical mind engaged immediately, personal feelings subordinated to security concerns. "How are they planning to disrupt the wedding?" "They want to kidnap Iris during the ceremony. Use her as leverage to force you to give back territory to reverse the destruction of their operations. Garrett thinks you love your daughter more than you love power. He's betting you'll trade empire for her safety." The calculation was sound, the kind of strategy that might work against most fathers. But Eva had spent 3 weeks learning who Dominic Ashford really was. Beneath the reputation had seen him make decisions that prioritized long-term stability over short-term sentiment, had understood that his love for Iris was real, but channeled through the same ruthless pragmatism that governed every other aspect of his life. "They're wrong." Dominic's voice was cold, final. "I wouldn't trade empire for anything, including my daughter's safety, because empire is what keeps her safe long-term. Give in once you invite every future attack. Garrett doesn't understand that, which is why he's losing, and I'm not." The brutal calculus should have horrified Eva. Instead, she recognized the logic, the chess player thinking that saw 7 moves ahead while everyone else struggled with the immediate board. Iris was safer with a father who maintained absolute control through fear than she would be with one who showed weakness that enemies could exploit. "We'll double security." Eva's suggestion came naturally, pulling from everything she'd learned about threat assessment and protective details. Keep Iris in a safe room until after the ceremony. Position teams at every access point. Turn the wedding into a fortress that happens to look like a garden party. Dominic nodded his hand, finding Eva's fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become familiar over late-night conversations and shared danger. "Exactly. Let them try. The security will be overwhelming enough that they'll see the trap and hopefully retreat. If not," he shrugged, the movement elegant and deadly, "we'll handle it. Permanently." Kian left after that, walking out of the library and Eva's life with shoulders bent under weight he'd earned through his own choices. Eva watched him go and felt nothing. No lingering attachment, know what might have been melancholy. That chapter was closed. Burned ashes scattered by winds that had reshaped her entire existence into something unrecognizable from who she'd been when she'd walked into his bedroom and discovered her life was a lie. The wedding day arrived with blue skies that felt like mockery or blessing depending on perspective. Eva woke in her suite to find Iris already there, perched on the window seat with coffee and pastries, her young face serious in ways that reminded Eva forcefully of Dominic, that same intensity focused inward instead of out. Nervous Eva asked, pulling on a robe, joining the teenager in morning light that painted the gardens gold. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? You're the one marrying my father," and Iris checked her phone. 6 hours. I'm terrified. The honesty slipped out before Eva could filter it, before she could maintain the composure she'd been practicing for 3 weeks. Not of Dominic, of what comes after. Of being Mrs. Ashford permanently, of every decision from now forward being measured against that identity. You could still walk away. Iris's observation was gentle, not challenging. Dad would understand. He might be disappointed, but he'd let you go if you asked. I don't want to go. Eva realized the truth as she spoke it. I want this life, this family, your father. Even with all the danger and violence and moral complexity that comes with it, I want to be here. Then you're already one of us. Iris smiled, something warm and accepting in her expression that made Eva's throat tighten. Welcome to the family, Mom. The word landed like a gift, like acceptance Eva hadn't realized she'd been desperate for, like being claimed by someone who understood exactly what she was choosing and approved anyway. They spent the morning together, Iris helping Eva into the ivory silk dress that fit like it had been designed specifically for her body, fastening the delicate buttons up her spine, adjusting the veil that was simple and elegant and cost more than Eva used to make in a month. You look beautiful. Iris stepped back, assessing her work. Dad's going to lose his mind when he sees you. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. Golden hour lighting that would photograph beautifully and give security teams maximum visibility. 50 guests began arriving at 3:30, filtered through checkpoints that made airport security look casual, each person vetted and searched and watched by guards who were only partially concealed. Half the attendees were Ashford soldiers in expensive suits, the other half genuinely invited allied families, business associates, the few people from Eva's old life who'd been deemed safe enough to know about the wedding. Her supervisor from Hope Harbor looked terrified through the entire ceremony, sitting in the back row, with wide eyes that suggested she was cataloging every detail to process later, trying to reconcile quiet Eva Marlowe, who helped trafficking victims, with this version standing at an altar beside a man whose reputation made hardened criminals cross streets to avoid proximity. The officiant was a judge who owed Dominic favors that probably involved dismissed charges and conveniently lost evidence. The vows were traditional, except where they weren't, where Dominic and Eva had written their own sections during late-night conversations about honesty and partnership and building something real from foundations laid in revenge. Dominic spoke first, his voice carrying across the garden with authority that demanded attention. Evangeline, I've spent 30 years building walls. Against enemies, against weakness, against anything that could destroy what I've created. Then you walked into my world, not seeking power, not fearing my darkness, just being exactly who you are. I told myself this was strategy, revenge against a son who needed teaching. But the truth is, I've wanted you since the moment I saw you 9 months ago at that charity gala, helping a frightened girl with such compassion, I forgot to breathe. Eva's eyes widened slightly. Not having known that Dominic had seen her before Kian brought her into the family orbit, that he'd been watching her for months before circumstances created the excuse to approach. I don't promise to be good. I can't. But I promise to be honest, to protect you with everything I have, to value your light without trying to dim it, to stand beside you, not above you. You conquered me, Eva, and I'm grateful you did. Then it was Eva's turn. Her hands steady despite the weight of 50 pairs of eyes watching, despite knowing these words would define how she was seen in Dominic's world going forward. Dominic, 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew what love looked like. Safe, predictable, easy. Then I discovered it was all a lie. And in my worst moment you appeared offering something I didn't know I needed: truth. You showed me that power isn't always cruel, that protection doesn't mean possession, that strength and tenderness can exist in the same person. You taught me to survive, to fight, to claim what I deserve instead of accepting what I'm given. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. I don't fear your darkness. I've walked in it and found my own strength there. I choose you. Not because you saved me, because you showed me how to save myself and then chose to stand with me anyway. This isn't revenge anymore. It's redemption. For both of us. The judge pronounced them married, invited Dominic to kiss his bride, and for a moment the entire garden held its breath. Then Dominic's hands framed Eva's face like she was something precious and dangerous that required reverence and caution, and he kissed her thoroughly enough that several guests looked away embarrassed by the intimacy on display despite the public setting. When they separated, both breathless, the applause that erupted felt genuine instead of obligatory. Eva turned to face the guests as Mrs. Dominic Ashford saw Kian in the back row with tears streaming down his face, saw Iris beaming in the front row, saw hard men who'd probably killed dozens smiling at the romance of it all, despite knowing the truth underneath. The reception lasted an hour before everything went to hell. Dinner was served, toasts offered. Iris giving a speech about gaining a stepmother who actually seemed to make her father happy for the first time in her memory. Eva was dancing with Dominic wrapped in his arms while music played, and the setting sun painted everything gold when the power cut. Lights died instantly, backup generators failing to engage like they'd been sabotaged. Someone screamed. Then gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, muzzle flashes strobing through darkness, bullets tearing through silk and flowers, and the carefully constructed illusion of safety. "Get down!" Dominic shoved Eva toward cover, his body between her and the threat, his hand already pulling a weapon from somewhere under his jacket. Half the guests scattered in genuine panic while the other half pulled guns and returned fire with the kind of practiced efficiency that said they'd been expecting this, waiting for it, maybe even hoping for the excuse to eliminate threats permanently. 15 Wolf Cartel soldiers had breached from 3 entry points, moving with military precision toward objectives that became clear fast: Dominic, Eva, and Iris. Not just a raid, a decapitation strike designed to remove the Ashford family's leadership entirely, to create power vacuum that could be exploited before new hierarchy solidified. But Dominic had planned for exactly this scenario. For every Wolf soldier there were 2 Ashford guards for every attack vector. There were defenders already positioned for every desperate move Garrett made. There was a counter-move already in motion. The firefight was brutal, and brief bullets ripping through the reception tent. Civilians diving under tables while soldiers executed tactics they'd drilled dozens of times. Eva didn't hide. Wouldn't, something in her spine refusing to cower while people died protecting her. She grabbed a gun from a fallen guard, checked the magazine like Dominic had taught her, and moved toward where she'd last seen Iris before the lights went out. A Wolf soldier stepped into her path, weapon rising, and Eva didn't hesitate, pulled the trigger twice, center mass, watched him drop without the paralysis that had frozen her during the assassination attempt. This was different. This was her wedding, her family, her life under attack. Hesitation meant death, and Eva had decided 3 weeks ago that she was done being the person who let others decide her fate. She found Iris huddled behind the overturned cake table, protected by 2 guards who'd taken bullets, keeping her safe. Eva grabbed the teenager's hand, pulled her toward the exit route Thorne had shown her during security briefings, moving through chaos with purpose that came from finally understanding what Dominic had been teaching. That survival wasn't about avoiding violence, it was about controlling it, directing it, becoming dangerous enough that threats reconsidered before attacking. They almost made it. 20 feet from the safe room entrance when a Wolf lieutenant appeared with Iris suddenly in his grip, gun to her head, using Dominic's daughter as the leverage Garrett had planned from the beginning. "Ashford, drop weapons or she dies." The demand, cut through gunfire, brought the entire battle to a stuttering halt. Dominic emerged from cover, blood on his sleeve from a graze, his face absolutely empty of expression in ways that were more terrifying than rage would have been. "You made a mistake coming here." His voice was quiet, conversational, like he was discussing weather instead of his daughter's life balanced on a trigger pull. An enormous mistake. Eva didn't wait for negotiation, didn't freeze, didn't panic, didn't defer to the men who were supposed to handle these situations. She raised the gun she'd taken, remembered firearms training, remembered Dominic's voice steady in her ear, teaching her to breathe and aim and shoot, and took the shot that saved everything. The bullet caught the Wolf lieutenant in the shoulder, his gun hand jerking away from Iris's head, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist free. Thorne's people rushed forward, neutralized the remaining threats, secured the area while Eva's ears rang and her hands shook, and the reality of what she'd just done settled like concrete in her stomach. Dominic was there, pulling both Eva and Iris into an embrace that felt like fortress walls closing around them. His voice rough with emotion he usually kept locked behind control. "You saved her. You saved our daughter." The possessive R made something crack in Eva's chest, made her understand that this was real now. Not strategy, not revenge, not business arrangement, but actual family built from unlikely materials and sealed in blood and terror, and the kind of love that grew in darkness because light was too vulnerable, too exposed, too easily extinguished. The aftermath took hours. Police arrived and left after perfunctory investigations, corruption ensuring that official reports would read robbery attempt instead of assassination, random violence instead of organized crime warfare. Wolf soldiers who survived were transferred to holding locations where their fates would be decided away from legal oversight. Garrett Wolf himself was captured alive, bleeding from 3 gunshot wounds but conscious enough to know he'd lost everything. Dominic gave Eva the choice one final time, his voice empty of inflection. "He tried to kill you on our wedding day, tried to take Iris, made war when he should have accepted defeat and disappeared. What happens to him is your call." Eva looked at the man who'd orchestrated attacks that left bodies bleeding on her wedding day, who'd bought her best friend and turned friendship into surveillance, who represented everything brutal and calculating about the world she'd married into. She could order his death with a word, could have vengeance served as permanent as bullets. But death was quick. Over. Final. Make him watch everything crumble. Eva's voice was steel wrapped in ice. Seize everything he owns. Expose every crime to authorities who'll actually prosecute. Make him spend the rest of his life in federal prison watching from inside while his empire gets divided among people who destroyed him. Let him live with this knowledge that attacking us was the worst decision he ever made. Dominic's smile was sharp enough to cut, proud enough to warm. Cruel and strategic. You've learned well. The execution of Eva's sentence took 3 days, assets frozen, evidence delivered to prosecutors who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of gift arrests, sweeping through Wolf territories like plague. Garrett Wolf died in prison 6 months later, knifed by someone who'd been paid to make it look random, revenge delivered slow enough to taste but inevitable enough to savor. The honeymoon never happened. Instead, Eva and Dominic spent their first week as husband and wife rebuilding security protocols, expanding territories that Wolf collapse had opened, establishing the new order where everyone understood what happened when you attacked the Ashfords. Eva attended every meeting, offered strategic input that was increasingly taken seriously, became less trophy wife and more actual partner in ways that surprised even Dominic's inner circle. 14 months later, Eva stood in Hope Harbor's new headquarters, a facility funded by Ashford money, staffed by people who knew not to ask questions about where resources came from, helping trafficking victims at a scale she'd only dreamed about before. 200 women safe in the past year alone, legal teams winning deportation cases, medical care and housing and job training turning survival into actual second chances. She was 7 months pregnant, the swell of her belly visible under the professional dress she wore to board meetings when Dominic found her reviewing case files in her office. He'd been in meetings with allied families all morning, negotiating territory disputes and succession planning, the business of empire building never quite finished. "You're supposed to be resting." His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs working at tension that had become chronic. Doctor's orders after what happened last week. Last week had been a scare false labor that sent Dominic into rare panic, drove him to call every specialist in Chicago, reminded Eva that underneath the dawn was just a man terrified of losing what mattered. They'd been lucky. The baby was fine. Eva was fine. But Dominic had been hovering ever since, protective instincts in overdrive. "I'm fine. We're fine." Eva leaned back against him, letting his warmth soak into muscles tired from carrying new life. "The baby's healthy. I'm healthy." "Stop worrying. Worrying is what keeps you safe." His hand spread across her belly, feeling their son kick against his palm. "Both of you. Their son." The doctors had confirmed it 2 months ago, a boy who would inherit Dominic's empire, who would carry the Ashford name into whatever future awaited families built on violence and strategy and the kind of love that grew despite impossible odds. Eva had cried when they'd found out hormones and joy and terror mixing, until she couldn't separate which emotion was driving the tears. Dinner that night was family. Dominic at the head of the table, Eva to his right, Iris home from her first semester at Harvard, Kian across from his half-sister in a position that had taken months to reach. Father and son were rebuilding something, not the relationship they'd had before, but maybe something better, honest about damage done, realistic about what could be salvaged, working toward functional, if not affectionate. Kian had a girlfriend now, a lawyer who knew exactly who the Ashfords were, and chose him anyway, who treated Eva with careful respect that acknowledged history without dwelling on it. They'd announced their engagement last month, and Eva had felt genuinely happy for him. Proof that she'd moved beyond bitterness into something healthier. To family. Dominic raised his glass, the toast simple but weighted with meaning that everyone at the table understood. Blood and chosen, to empires built on loyalty, and to the woman who conquered the unconquerable. Eva's throat tightened, pregnancy hormones making her emotional faster than she'd gotten used to. But underneath the tears, she felt something else: satisfaction, belonging, the certainty that every choice she'd made in the past year had led her exactly where she was supposed to be. "I love you." She whispered it to Dominic later, wrapped in his arms in the bed they now shared, their son moving between them like proof that impossible things happened when you stopped accepting the world as it was and started making it into what you needed. "I've loved you since the red dress." Dominic's admission came soft, honest, the kind of vulnerability he showed only here, only with her. "Took me 8 months to admit it even to myself. Took revenge to give me the excuse to claim you. But every risk was worth it to end up here. Worth the violence, the danger, the moral complexity, worth everything." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing like they had 1,000 times before, like they would 1,000 times more. "You walked into my darkness expecting to be consumed. Instead, you found your own light and used it to illuminate paths I'd forgotten existed. You made me better, Eva. Made me want to be better." The words settled between them like vows, more binding than anything they'd spoken at their wedding promises about who they were choosing to become instead of just who they'd been. Eva kissed him, tasting truth and commitment and the kind of love that survived because it had been forged in fire hot enough to burn away everything false. Somewhere in the mansion, Iris was probably on the phone with friends, navigating Harvard social dynamics with the same strategic thinking she'd inherited from Dominic. Somewhere in the city, people moved through lives that intersected with Ashford interests without ever knowing it, protected or threatened by decisions made in rooms they'd never see. Somewhere in federal prison, men who'd made the mistake of attacking this family served sentences that would last the rest of their lives. And here in darkness, broken only by moonlight through windows overlooking gardens, where they'd married, Dominic and Eva Ashford held each other and their unborn son, building something that started as revenge and became redemption, that began in betrayal and ended in belonging, that proved love could grow in the strangest soil if you were brave enough to plant seeds and strong enough to protect what grew.